Um, I just want you to know that, Martha, I think you're going to have a big following because what you're talking about is so important to all of us. Um, and I know I'm going to let you introduce you because you have such an incredible background, that you come to it with a passion from experience, with your husband that you'll tell us about, and your whole background with the accounting business in Anderson, and how you got, what is this, 20 years that you've been in a process here with this?
Yeah, 21 years. Yeah.
21 years doing this. And I think it took all this time, right, to blossom into something that you're going to share with us all today. So please welcome Martha CARLIN. She's on a quest, and we're very happy that she's working with us in our whole Parkinson's community. We're the Parkinson's Wellness Project, and we're based in Rockland County. And please find out about us and all the exercise programs and education programs that we do. But you're going to love this one with Martha. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Susan. So yes, I am Martha CARLIN. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called the Bio Collective, a Parkinson's blog called Martha's Quest, and a probiotic product line called Biotic Quest. And all of this started 21 years ago from my husband, John, here in the picture with me. So actually, my background and training is in accounting. I came out of school with an accounting degree and went to work for Arthur Andersen as an auditor. And as an auditor, one of the first things they teach you is never trust anything anybody tells you, examine the evidence for yourself, and ask questions. And they trained us in a process called transaction flow review, which is how you look at a business to identify business risk. And in that process, you are drawing a flow chart of everything that flows through the business. You are asking questions and looking for steps in the process that may be broken, because that's where the business risk comes. And so for 20 years, I worked in the business world. I was what's called a business turnaround expert later in my career. And in 2002, John was 44 years old. We had two small children, and I had an older child from a first marriage. And John was diagnosed with Parkinson's in November of that year. And I listened to what the doctor said, and, it was like, I mean, they don't really give you a lot of, no discussion about how it might have happened, nothing you can do to change the trajectory. It just seemed very problematic how it was being approached. And I looked at it and I said, well, this is a systems problem, and I'm going to apply my systems training to looking at Parkinson's. And so I started to draw kind of a flow chart of John's life, which I'll show you a bit later in the presentation, and examining what's the major thing flowing through the body, which is food and water. And so I started to study the science of nutrition and agriculture, and examining how our food was being grown, what was happening with genetically modified crops, what was happening with pesticides, because, pesticides are neurotoxins. And in that process, threw out everything in the cabinet and started trying to go all organic, which was virtually impossible in 2002. And so along the way, began to expand my knowledge beyond the fields of nutrition and agriculture and genetic engineering to studying really deeper the Parkinson's pathologies, protein misfolding, and all of the different pieces of that puzzle. And in 2014, I read a book by Dr. Martin Blazer of NYU called Missing Microbes. And he was talking about the age of, growing up in the age of antibiotics, which all of us did. They came to the world in the 1940s and 50s, and expanded across the globe, and how antibiotics were contributing to the rise of many chronic diseases. And that really resonated with me because I knew that as a child, John had had a lot of strep infections and had taken a lot of antibiotics. And I had talked to many people with Parkinson's who had a similar history of chronic strep infections or ear infections or taking acne medication, or antibiotics for acne. And so that was kind of the first light bulb for me. And Dr. Blazer talked about something called the microbiome, which I'll talk to you about today. And that was the first I had ever heard that term. Later that year, they started to connect it to Parkinson's. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about. So let me see if I can. So Parkinson's and the gut microbiome, which is really what led me to founding the company, because when Dr. Shepperhan's paper came out, he showed that he could divide the two different types of Parkinson's by the bacteria in the gut. And if you're not familiar, there are two primary types of Parkinson's. One is tremor dominant, and that's where you shake. And the other is what's called posture and gait, and that's where you are more rigid and your feet freeze and you have more difficulty walking, and you're more bent over in the penguin type posture. And when I saw that paper from Dr. Shepperhan's, I was like, that's it. The gut microbiome is the general ledger of the body. And I quit my job and started funding research at the University of Chicago, and went on later that year to found the Bio Collective to start collecting basically poop samples from people, because the answers are in the microorganisms that live in our gut. And so this is a bit of that story. So hopefully it's going to move forward here. So, it just so happens that humans are actually more microbial than we are human. And most people don't realize that. But in terms of DNA or genes that perform functions in our body, the order of magnitude of bacterial DNA to our human DNA is about 150 to 1. There are 100 trillion microbes in and on our bodies, and they function as our internal pharmacy to help maintain our health. There are about 2 times as many bacterial cells as there are human cells, weighs about 4 pounds, and other organisms in the microbiome are protozoa, archaea, fungi, yeasts, and viruses. So what does this microbial population in our body do? Well, it digests and provides nutrient metabolism for us. It's producing hormones and neurotransmitters. 70% of our immune system is located in our enteric nervous system in the gut, and the microbes are communicating with and training our immune system. It regulates metabolism, our energy, storage, and expenditure. The microbiome produces B vitamins, vitamin K, delivers vitamin A and vitamin D. It's making amino acids. It's detoxifying when we come in contact with toxins in our food, water, air. It regulates inflammation, and the gut lining protects us from pathogens, and the beneficial microbes protect us from pathogens. Microbes are really everywhere, transforming and connecting everything. And I would say, over the last 4 years, it has created a terror of microbes and this crazy amount of using sanitizers. And that is actually not particularly healthy for our beneficial microbes. So many diseases are connected to the gut. Hippocrates, I think many years ago, made the statement that all disease begins in the gut. And in Chinese medicine and in the Indian Ayurvedic medicine, much of that medicine starts with evaluating gut and digestion and how this is working. But you can see here just in the last, since the work on the Human Microbiome Project in 2012, these are all of the different diseases that have been connected to the gut microbiome. And, you know, what I found in talking to people with Parkinson's and in collecting our sample database is that many people don't just have one disease, they have multiple diseases. And in the US, I think they say now at least a third of the population has 2 or more chronic diseases. And inflammatory bowel disease or irritable bowel ulcerative colitis, this down here, about a third of the people who have IBD or IBS or ulcerative colitis will go on to develop Parkinson's disease. So these very clear connections to Parkinson's and the gut microbiome. There is also evidence that severe chronic constipation can precede a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease by as much as 15 years. So, and I think there really is a lack of understanding from general practitioners and neurologists and specialists in the motor diseases in really understanding what this means. And what I can tell you, in our laboratory, when we were collecting fecal samples, one day, one of the young women made a comment to me. She said, you know, I can tell when a Parkinson's sample comes in without looking at any data about the patient. I can recognize that they have Parkinson's separate from all the other samples we collect by just looking at the stool, because in the Parkinson's samples, there were actually segments of the stool that were like concrete, indicating there was definitely a difference in water homeostasis in the body and in the fecal samples. And they actually had to use a different method to process the fecal samples for our lab storage than they did for all the other samples that we collected. So you may be familiar with Brock's hypothesis of staging Parkinson's, and this has been updated a bit. I think there are now doctors who are looking at Brock's hypothesis of, so his hypothesis was it was something that was coming in through the nose, the olfactory bulb, and then coming into the brain and down into the gut. That way, now they are looking at both the potential for basically colonization through the nose or colonization through the mouth, or both, and how that impacts the trajectory.
Martha, just let me interrupt for 1 second. Do you want to expand your screen so you see the one slide at a time? Because we're seeing everything.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
I don't know why that would be.
Well, I guess. Oh, okay. Maybe we'll see soon.
Let me see if this works, because it's probably making the slides too small.
Yeah.
There's a screen down at the lower right that you can click on.
Does that work? Or is it still showing on?
Hello? No, we don't see your screen at all.
Okay, well, okay, that didn't work then.
Screen she was on. She was just on.
We're just having all kinds of technical difficulties.
One of those days. It's okay. We're listening intently.
Let's see. Let's see if I view, stop video, mute, speaker view.
Why?
It's part of your PowerPoint presentation. You need to go to the presentation mode, which looks like a little projection screen down in the lower right corner of your PowerPoint.
Well, that's what but that's actually what I'm using, and it's not projecting to you. So the little thing that says, you know, that's on the stick, you know, it's actually, well, how about,
But right now, your screen isn't sharing. So if you share the screen, you might already have fixed
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well,
oh, that's the wrong presentation.
whoops.
Oh, it's something.
Hmm?
Yeah. You know, lose all these people over here.
Try again.
Okay. I I would tell some jokes, but I don't think I know any. Here we go. All right.
Okay.
So it's, you know what, let's just go with that, Martha. It's the same as before, but
What screen?
Well, no, I'm not actually doing it yet. So now let's see. Okay, now,
oh, Brack's hypothesis. Okay.
is that
Oh, there
work?
you go.
Yes.
Yes, that's it. That's it. You got it.
Okay,
Very good.
so Brock's hypothesis is essentially that a pathogen enters the body via the nasal cavity and is subsequently swallowed and reaches the gut, initiating the Lewy pathology. Alpha-synuclein has been identified that it is something called an antimicrobial peptide. And that is attempting to deal with pathogens in the body, and they're just not fully clearing. So, and in Brock's hypothesis, it shows that over time, this colonization moves through the brain and causes sleep and motor disturbances, and then emotional and cognitive disturbances. So this is actually the initial paper that really launched me into expanding my work exponentially beyond just looking at John. And Dr. Shepper-Hans is in a hospital in Finland. He does a lot of research, but he also sees patients. And he has gone on to do many, many more publications. This is just a handful of his microbiome publications. And since the time of his kind of launching the understanding that microbes are involved, I haven't updated this, but it's continued to rise every year to 2024. So the amount of evidence connecting Parkinson's disease to the microbiome has just continued to expand exponentially. And really what's the driver behind what's going on with these microbes is inflammation. So the microbes cause this chronic low-grade inflammation in the gut, in the brain, really throughout the body. And the immune system is attempting to fight that off, but it's getting fatigued as the inflammation rises. And this inflammation feeds oxidative stress. What are some ways that microbes can impact Parkinson's? This is a little bit technical, but basically bacterial protein toxins can form little pores or holes in the gut lining that enable endotoxin or lipopolysaccharide, these toxins, to cross over the gut lining and into the blood. And those can then move through the blood to different parts of the body, or they can travel via the vagus nerve up to the brain. So this coagulation of oxidative stress, you get the oxidative stress that builds into hypercoagulation, which, you know, in some diseases can be blood clotting. In Parkinson's, it's the amyloid formation. And then that moves up into this systemic inflammation and dysregulation of the immune function. And then later, and these stars show that there are current novel bacterial markers related to these in the publications. And the check marks are those things have been confirmed in the publications. And what I would say is now the gut brain axis has also been confirmed in the publications. There's some research that has actually shown the beta amyloid moving through the vagus nerve up to the brain. And then that also affects our mitochondrial function, which is producing our energy, and it can also impact our vascular function, which is providing oxygen to the brain. So, well, I put a paper in there, but it didn't show up. So the organisms that are connected with Parkinson's in the publications are Neisseria, Toxoplasma gondii, and Mycobacterium avium paratuberculosis. And so there are some publications in Europe looking at toxoplasma, and we actually found toxoplasma in John's samples, and he was treated for that back in 2017.
I have to tell you, Martha, I have to tell you, you have the most beautiful slides. The colors are gorgeous, and we're enjoying watching them, even though we don't see you. Your slides are beautiful, as I'm sure you are too.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a great friend and designer who has multiple sclerosis, who actually does all my design work for me. And
wow.
We climbed Kilimanjaro with her back in 2011 with a group of people with Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis, who climbed to the top of Kilimanjaro. So,
well, she was inspired.
Parkinson's is complicated. It's often called a designer disease because, every person has a different set of the various symptoms, motor and non-motor. And I think that is largely because different microbiomes and colonization with different pathogens actually presents different symptomology. And I have spent a fair amount of time sort of digging around, looking at those and saying, well, how would this, we know this microbe causes these kind of symptoms in an acute disease, but, what would the symptom be in just sort of a chronic low-grade infection? And, it's things like muscle stiffness or coughing or respiratory problems or trouble swallowing or, hoarseness of the voice, all these different pieces that connect to Parkinson's. So this is just my little joke I say sometimes. We thought it was a simple process, but it's really complicated. So, what impacts the microbiome? Well, back to my original thought about mapping out, the transaction flow in the body, and that is really everything impacts the microbiome. So what you're putting through your body has a significant impact on the key nutrients that you're able to take up, the ability of the gut lining to protect you. It impacts insulin resistance, inflammation, something called short chain fatty acid production, your ability to, so antioxidants and your ability to handle reactive oxygen species. And some of the negative things that are flowing through are sugar and processed foods. I took to chastising people at the in-person meetings I would attend, the annual Parkinson's Summit at the hospital that had all the vendors for Parkinson's. They all had M&Ms and candies on their table. When I went to the court,
not us.
Parkinson's,
Not us. We have smoothies here right now that are fresh fruit and almond milk and flax, and we try and eat healthy.
That's good. Because many of the ones I went to early on had donuts and cookies. Not so good for you. They have shown that a variety of plants is very beneficial, eating organic to try to avoid those herbicides and pesticides. More recently, I don't have it on this slide, but there is a Dr. Michael Phillips, sorry, who is showing that a ketogenic diet and periodic fasting to allow that rest and digest to occur can be very beneficial for Parkinson's. This is just one of my notebooks. I probably have, somewhere between 50 and 100 notebooks of different scientific notes or different observations about John. And these were some things from mapping out John's story and connecting that to the scientific papers and the microbiome that I kind of tried to write in a simple to me, but probably not to somebody else, way to sort of look at what might be connected to that. This is a much easier way to look at it. And I actually encourage people to take a piece of paper and write out your life story, because we go to all these specialists now who really don't have time to talk to us or see us or understand our life story. And your life story is really a big part of your Parkinson's story. And stress and things that cause fear and anxiety can be big drivers of changes in the microbiome and drivers of Parkinson's. There is definitely a connection with anxiety and what's called like turning on the fight or flight, so that fear-based mechanism in the body is turned on and never turned off. And so for John, he had digestive issues even from birth, and his mother's no longer living, but his sister said they called him the green baby. So for the first 2 years of life, he was green and vomiting all the time. So he had digestive issues even back then. In his teens, he took allergy shots, and that was another indication that his immune system was not well developed. He was a caddy on a golf course in high school, and that, of course, exposed him to many herbicides. And then he worked for a manometer company that exposed him to mercury. And then he worked in the, after college, he worked in oil and gas sales. And so he was out in the field where he was around hydrocarbons. So there were many different toxins that sort of connected to that. And then in 1994, so that would have been about 6 years before he was diagnosed. He was in Mexico and got a travel bug. There are connections to food poisoning and dramatic long-term changes in our state of health. He founded a company and was under very high stress from 1999 to 2002. And he developed Parkinson's disease in 2002. Actually, the company founding was over here, 92 to 94.
Martha, I think this is a great idea to do a timeline. It's amazing to see. I'm just wondering if you have a blank one of these and people could just fill in themselves. It's a great structure that you have here.
I don't have a blank, but I actually could probably ask my designer to do a blank. I mean, I would probably add a few more things on here since I started it, but I had viral and immune assaults. I would add to that your vaccination schedule. There are so endotoxin, which I talked about crossing the barrier. Endotoxin is actually used as a vaccine adjuvant. And so then if your body isn't able to deal with the different loads of endotoxin, that can be a problem. And there, John was actually impacted by having COVID, and the spike protein from COVID attaches to this endotoxin and travels around the body that way. Your diet, so, diet, alcohol can have a significant impact on your microbiome. Stress is probably one of the biggest drivers, because stress depletes our minerals, and minerals are really important. And I'm coming to fully appreciate that, at least in part, Parkinson's is a disease of malnutrition, either from poor food quality or inability to properly digest and uptake the food. Exercise, sleep disturbances, environmental impacts, surgeries, and I would put specific antibiotic use. And then on here I have, this is where I developed a probiotic for John to try to address some of those problems. And that's what launched me into, from just looking at poop to making probiotics to try to help restore people's guts. So, then I say, okay, well, now I've kind of shaken you up and said, oh my goodness, all these things are impacting me. What do I do? And, one of the things I tell people, if it's too overwhelming, there's, two really key things. The first steps you should take is your water. So most people don't realize, but our public water systems were designed to deal with pathogens, but they were not designed to deal with pharmaceutical pollution and the chemicals that go down the drains now. And the water treatment actually doesn't remove pharmaceutical pollution. So if you look at the environmental working group's work, you'll see that the public water supplies contain a lot of pharmaceutical and over-the-counter medications that can impact your health and your microbiome, including hormones that people are taking. So I recommend that people get a really good water filter if you can afford it, and a reverse osmosis water filter, and then add minerals to your water. And then as much as possible to make sure that your food is organic as much as possible, and that it's healthy and from a quality source. Or if, buy from a local farmer, that you can ask them, how are you growing this food? What chemicals do you use? When do you apply them? How far away from when you harvest? All of that sort of stuff. Many of the grains, I think part of the problem that so many people have with bread is because our grains are actually now dried with a product called glyphosate, which is the Roundup. And so you want to make sure that you're getting grains that have, if you're eating grains, that you're getting grains that have not been dried down with glyphosate. I think that might be one of the biggest drivers of the loss of our microbiome, because it kills about 50% of the gut bacteria, and that's mostly good bacteria, not the bad bacteria. Your diet will impact your microbiome and your overall health. There are still debates on, the different diets. Dr. Lori Mishley, she has a lot of information and data that she's been collecting. She's a naturopath, and
We
you know,
work with her. I'm
Okay.
glad that you're together. You work with her also. It's very good that you know each other.
well, I know her peripherally. I'm not working with her, but she has a lot of great historical data about food, and her recommendations for dietary recommendations. I also really like Dr. Terry Walls, who has MS and reversed her MS with a very nutrient dense diet. Dr. Wall's diet is more, I would say, more ketogenic. So it is higher fat, but very specific types of fat and meat. And I think you're eating about 8 cups of vegetables a day on Dr. Wall's diet. So that's a lot of food preparation. So it can be difficult for people with Parkinson's, especially if they're living alone, to get this sort of quality and nutrient density. Because if you don't have someone to help you with the preparation, it can be a little more challenging. But I think you can find that some of the grocery stores will provide, diced vegetables, or, a way to maybe help you with that. And you actually might even talk to the deli section of your grocery store and see if they would, provide you a fresh diced group of vegetables, that you could just pick up. I think that you might be able to do that. Avoid sugar. The processed sugars are very detrimental in more way. I could do a whole separate presentation on that, but processed sugar is really dangerous in many ways to our brain and our overall body. And that is also partly because the sugar, that is one of the crops that is dried down with glyphosate. So the sugar also has a lot of glyphosate in it. And anything that has high fructose corn syrup and that sort of processing in it is not going to be beneficial. You want to eat more fiber, but again, back to the constipation issue, you can't eat more fiber if you're not getting enough fluid flow. So you've got to balance that out, getting your digestion moving. Working on, it's very important to get yourself to where you are having a good bowel movement and removing the waste on a daily basis. And then your rest and digest, and that is doing some sort of periodic fasting where you might do a extended, say, 16 or 18 hours between a meal to allow your gut to process everything that's in there and get the waste out. Or in some cases, I actually did talk to a gentleman with Parkinson's who did a longer fast, which, I would only recommend doing something like that under the supervision of a physician. But he reversed all of his Parkinson's by going through a long-term fasting protocol that he worked on with a physician. But he was also heavy, so he had extra weight. And, my husband, John, is very thin. Many people I talk to and see with Parkinson's, particularly as it advances, are very thin, which is another kind of sign of malnutrition, not getting enough food to keep the muscle mass and the fat on the body. Digestive enzymes can help with the breakdown of the food so that you can access those nutrients. Exercise is very important. John is actually has helped set up the Pedaling for Parkinson's programs across the United States that came from Dr. Jay Alber's work. And he showed that cycling on a stationary bike 3 times a week at a specific RPM could reverse your Parkinson's symptoms by about 35%. And then probiotics. I have a probiotic that I made for John that helped reverse his symptoms and has helped a number of people with Parkinson's with chronic constipation. There's also a company called Neurally that is doing a clinical trial on Parkinson's here in the States and has done some clinical trials in Korea. And really, you have to own your own health. Do not just turn your health over to, I'm not saying ignore your doctors, but what I am saying is trust your intuition and listen to your body. Your body is telling you something, and it's very important to reconnect with your body. And there's also something I haven't added here, but my husband has been doing. There's a gentleman by the name of Howard Shifke who has a series of YouTube videos using Qigong to kind of reconnect to your body. And his mother had Parkinson's. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and he reversed some of his symptoms through actually doing these exercises and his protocol. So, what I want to give you is hope that the microbiome is something that is malleable and changeable, and you can rebuild your internal garden and have a tremendous impact on the trajectory of your disease. But you have to own your own health to do that. And so you've got to start to educate yourself. You've got to learn about food. You've got to get up and move and make every effort to be healthy and happy and keep moving.